Well, welcome back to the Anti-War Room. Tom Andrews here, Director of the Win Without War Coalition with John Isaacs, once again from Council for Livable World. John, a very big week this week. The House is back in session. The Senate's coming back next week. Yesterday, in the newspaper of Washington, Politico, appropriately named, there was a front page story that said that the declares anti-war movement in retreat. Is the anti-war movement in retreat, John Isaacs?
I would say that the headline was mistaken, and in fact what's going to happen with those opposed to the war is looking for a different way to go after the war. Just to compare it to George Washington in the Revolutionary War, had all these decided frontal assaults were not the best way to try to defeat the British, but instead basically resorted to guerrilla warfare and other ways to get out the British, and I think that's what we're going to do. The frontal assaults, trying to get 60 votes for time limit end of the war, seemed not to work this past year. So this year we're going to try new approaches which we think might have better success, both in terms of dividing the Republicans, trying to get 60 votes to get things to pass, and eventually stopping the war.
And of course, when it comes to the budget, and we're going to have a new budget that's before the Congress on February the 4th, war spending at the rate of $8 to $10 billion a month. We're going to be seeing the $1 trillion mark eclipsed in 2008, all in the midst of a recession that is upon us, and the need for the Congress and the government to do something about it and appropriate money. And of course, when you face a budget battle over $10 billion a month in the midst of Americans having their paychecks dwindle away, being gouged at the gas pump and being threatened with a pink slip, it sharpens, it seems to me, the contradiction between throwing money into the endless war in Iraq and neglecting the concerns at home, which means that this is a very important time, a very important year for us to be pushing these budget battles and holding members accountable when it comes to the war in Iraq.
That's right. We would still oppose the appropriations, $100, $200 billion that the President will probably ask for the wars in Iraq and for the war in Iraq, but at the same, and we would ask members to vote against that without a timetable to get out of Iraq.
So there's no retreat on either the budget battles or whatnot.
No.
Just opening up, as you say, other fronts, additional
Right.
fronts in this battle.
Absolutely.
One of them, of course, is we had the defense minister from Iraq declaring just the other day that Iraq is going to need U.S. forces to 2018 to 2020, endless war, and we're talking about permanent agreements, treaties between the United States and Iraq to provide those forces. How can we stop that from happening, John?
There's some other things besides that. You named this defense minister, but the President of the United States just over the weekend talked about, well, maybe Senator McCain's estimate we might be in Iraq for 100 years is a little too much, but 10 years should be fine. So the President's planning to sign an agreement with the Iraqi leaders to commit the United States to Iraq well beyond his term, into the next term of the new president who takes office in 2009. There are ways to stop that, and I think Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro introduced some legislation to say no such agreement without coming to Congress for prior approval. Hillary Clinton has also introduced legislation to do the same thing. I'm pretty confident that Congress will try to take steps to block this kind of permanent agreement that would tie the hands of the next president.
And we're going to be following very closely both of those legislative fronts and letting you know exactly what's going on. Last Saturday, we had the President announcing that significant progress had been made in terms of reconciliation in Iraq with the passage of a so-called depacification law. Turns out, when you look at the fine print, this was the law that was supposed to undo the damage that was done by Paul Bremer when he was in charge over in Iraq, that basically took Sunnis out of government to jobs and really took away their futures. These were members of the Ba'ath Party at the very lowest levels who were in the Ba'ath Party largely so that they could get work. They were thrown out, and of course this was one of the reasons that we had this sectarian violence. This so-called reconciliation bill that was passed, undoing that damage, but when you look at the fine print after the President's declaration of success, you find out that in fact more Sunnis could be eliminated from government jobs than even before. The Shia officials were boasting of that fact, that even those who were in the Ba'ath Party at the lowest level wouldn't be able to get any jobs in the foreign ministry, the defense ministry. So once again, John, and again, this was important because the president's claiming that, okay, not only is the surge having success on the ground militarily, but now the criticisms that there's been no political progress, we have something to come back with you on. We can now cite political progress. Once again, that's incorrect. Once again, a manipulation of the facts and an attempted deception of the American people.
Yes, the manipulation of the facts started, of course, in the run-up to the war in 2002. We all know that President Bush declared mission accomplished in 2003, a few months after the war began, and this is just another example. We're winning the war, everything's going fine. There is some evidence that the military situation on the ground has been stabilized to some extent, but there's no evidence whatsoever of reconciliation among the parties in Iraq, or that the government will be ready to stand on its own 2 feet anytime soon. So it's another example of Bush claiming progress, and there really is no progress.
And remember, this was the very basis of this surge, that the rationale was that if we can stabilize the country militarily, it will give the political leaders in Iraq the breathing space, as they put it, to have these reconciliation measures passed. And of course, that's been a dismal failure. So we continue to put our young people in harm's way. We continue to dump tens of billions of dollars a month into Iraq. No progress whatsoever 1 year later. We have a number of things coming up, John. I just want to review them for everyone watching, and we're going to be following this very closely every week. We have the State of the Union coming up on the 28th of this month, and we'll be looking, obviously, to see what the President's going to say about Iraq. We have the new budget on February 4th, which will include the appropriation request, we think anyway, for Iraq.
This is the new federal budget for fiscal year 2009, just to clarify.
Exactly, and then that will, of course, go through the legislative process in Congress, and of course the appropriations committees, and then the full Congress, House and Senate, have to approve them. And then finally, we have coming up on our radar screen in March, General Petraeus and Ambassador Crocker will come back to Washington. They're going to give a report on the progress of the surge, and of course give us more opportunity to debate where we are. Interesting, on the campaign trail, meanwhile, back at the ranch, a clear line of demarcation. I mean, with respect to the war, if you look at the Democrats' presidential hopefuls, you know, it's hard to discern a really clear distinction when it comes to Iraq. Everyone wants to get out. The time frames might be somewhat different, but it's pretty clear. And the distinction between Democrats and Republicans on this issue of Iraq seem to be getting clearer and clearer by the day.
That's right. It's while the economy is taking on increasing importance as a campaign issue, Iraq is still a very critical issue for an awful lot of voters. A lot of voters will be voting both in the primaries in the upcoming months, but also in November on the basis of the war. And as you say, the Republicans continue to support the Bush war, where Democrats are opposing it and promising to get the troops out. There are differences in how quickly they get the troops out, but I'm confident that if a Democrat is elected, that the U.S. troops will come out of Iraq very promptly, beginning in 2009.
And as this issue of the economy continues to be more and more of a hot issue, as it were, politically, because the economy continues to deteriorate, again, it's another opportunity for us to make the point that taking billions of dollars, $10 billion every month, and throwing it down an endless war in Iraq is not the way to stimulate the American economy and get people back to work. John, thanks for joining us again. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week. The Senate comes back next week. We're going to follow these developments very closely. Thanks for joining us in the Anti-War Room.